Behind me is WKU's planetarium and the rest of our fantastic science buildings. They study astronomy, meteorology, chemistry, biology, all kinds of really cool stuff in there, doing all kinds of really neat research. Now, down where we're at on the hill, we do some maybe a little different kind of research. We do research in the social sciences. And research in the social sciences looks a little different than research in this kind of science. So let's get into that. So, what does it look like to do research in the social sciences? Well, a great place to start is going to be by asking the question, what are social sciences? Well, put very simply, the social sciences are the collection of disciplines, academic disciplines, which seek to utilize the scientific method to study people and the institutions and organizations and structures that people build. So, what are examples of the social sciences? Well, of course, this is an economics course. Economics is a social science. Psychology is a social science. Anthropology, communication studies could be considered a social science. Political science could be considered a social science. These are all social sciences. Sociology, criminology, and so on and so forth. All of the branches of the various academic disciplines which try to study people in a scientific way are engaging in social science. So what does that mean? Well, straight out of your fifth grade, sixth grade classroom and into your college economics course, hey, it's the scientific method. What does it mean to do the scientific method? Well, you're going to ask a question about something. You're going to make an educated guess about what you think the answer likely is. You're going to perform some sort of experiment or test of some sort. Sometimes we kind of just skip to the data part. We find some way to collect data, and then we're going to analyze that data and write a report about it. So you are probably very familiar with this process from your kind of high school science classrooms. But where it gets a little different in the social sciences is especially around that experimentation and data element. How are we actually going to do experiments and how are we going to collect data? That's where things get a little different in the social sciences. So let's take a question like this. This is an economic question we can ask. We'll explore this question more or less at different points in the course. Does raising taxes on cigarettes discourage smoking? Meaning, if we raise taxes on cigarettes, will people smoke less? Well, there's an economic question we can ask. And we might come to a couple different hypotheses. We might say, well, in general, when you raise the price of something, people tend to do less of it. That's kind of what we call the law of demand, or like very, very fundamental idea of economics. The more it costs, the less people do of it. So maybe, yeah, it discourages smoking. But on the other hand, the kind of people who smoke are probably not the kind of people who are going to dramatically change how much they smoke just because of a little tax increase. So it's ambiguous. Maybe your hypothesis goes one way or the other. Well, what would be the ideal way to test this? Well, an experiment, as in a double-blind, randomized, controlled trial. Well, what does this mean? Well, you should remember from your high school science, you take a group of similar people or just random people. You randomly assort them into two groups so that you get two similar groups, right? People that are basically all the same, and you call one group the control group and one group the treatment group. You keep the control group the same and you treat the other group. So if this is a medication study, you give one group the placebo, you give one group the medication, and you statistically test, is there a difference in the outcome for these two different groups? Well, that would work great, but can we really do that? Can we get a group of similar people, randomly assort them into two groups such that we get two relatively equivalent groups, and then we give one the tax increase and the other one we don't raise taxes on them? What is that even? How would we even go about doing that? Do we Do we, just randomly kidnap people? Oh, we're gonna snatch them out of their houses and put some of them on an island with no tax increase and some of them on an island with a tax increase on cigarettes. You guys are starting to see, okay, so we can't really do that to answer this question. Do taxes on cigarettes make people smoke less? Well, we can't really do a randomized controlled trial. So what are we gonna do instead? Well, we got lots of options. Here are a few of the ways that social scientists are going to try and answer these questions. One, we use surveys. We can just ask people, hey, if we raise your taxes, will you keep smoking? Or, this kind of thing. We can interview them. We can call them up. Hey, if we do this, what will you do? That might be one thing we can do, one option on the table. A bunch of the social sciences rely on surveys. Economists use several surveys. A lot of big national level surveys become data that is used for different economic questions. We can rely on historical data. So we can look at a time in the past when cigarette taxes were raised and see if the rates of smoking went up or down. We can try to find a natural experiment. Now, these are going to be kind of hard. Effectively, we're talking about like a historical case study. So maybe we find two similar states, one that increased taxes on cigarettes and one that left them the same, and compare the change after that. That would get a little closer, those natural experiments. And we might have some conjecture. We might develop a theory or an economic model or some sort of way of just thinking about the question. That's one way that research is done in some social sciences. You just have a theory, and ideally you want to test it with one of these other means, but sometimes you just build a logical argument about what you think is likely the case. So some of these are obviously probably more compelling or convincing than others. But all of these are going to have, there's some shakiness here. So what's hard? Well, one thing that's hard about doing social science research is getting the variable that we want to test and only that variable. So in this example we're using of the tax on cigarettes, we only want to know about the impact of the tax on cigarettes. So then okay, all right, let's use the historical data thing. Okay, we find a time that the tax on cigarettes was increased, like in 2009, the tax on cigarettes was raised. Okay, so this is like double, something like that, quite a bit. So it's over $1 a pack now. Okay, the federal excise tax on cigarettes over $1 a pack. Okay, so that's a time the tax on cigarettes went up. And then we see 2009, the rates of smoking cigarettes goes down. Can we therefore conclude this happened, then this happened, therefore the raising the taxes caused people to smoke less? Can we conclude that? No, we can't, because correlation does not imply causation. Or in Latin, we say post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because this. It does not logically inherently follow that just because this thing happened and then this thing happened, that those two things are connected. That is not necessarily the case. So what could confound, or what other variables could explain this? Well, okay, so you raise taxes on cigarettes in 2009, people smoke less. So what else could explain it? Well, for one thing, people were already smoking less. Culturally, we were smoking less than we were 20 years before. It had become, and even more so now, has become something kind of ostracized. People kind of judge you if you smoke cigarettes these days. Whatever, sure. So maybe it's this cultural component. Another thing is, at the same time, vapes are starting to become commonplace. So maybe it was a substitution, a switching from cigarettes towards vapes, something like that. So teasing out just the relationship between the tax and the outcome we're trying to measure is actually really hard. That's a hard thing to try and understand. So that's one problem. Another problem is what we might call the observation effect, or I think it's been called the Hawthorne effect, I think I've heard, is this idea that if people know we're studying them, they tend to behave differently. Now, is that going to affect this The cigarette tax thing, maybe not. But if people know we're watching, they might behave differently than if they don't know, you know? A related idea to this, if we just ask people, let's say we use the survey, hey, if we raise taxes, will you keep buying cigarettes? Well, they might say, yeah, I'll keep buying, or they might say, no, I would quit if it was more. But here's the problem with that. One thing, yeah, they might lie, they might be dishonest, but even harder than that, even more tricky than that, they may try to be honest, but not even know what the honest answer is. People may not be aware, hey, if the taxes were higher, would I actually keep smoking? You may not even know. So they may try and be honest, but can't even tell the answer. And obviously there's lots of ethical concerns here. We want to treat people reasonably and treat people good and treat people well, humanely, even as we try and research them. So that option we were talking about of kidnapping these groups and isolating them into two groups and trying to get them to raise taxes on one group on one island and leave the taxes the same. Oh, we can't do any of this. This is all just horribly wrong. This is bad. So we can't, those options are off the table. So all of this to say, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be hard to do research in the social sciences. It's not going to come easy. And this is why, hey, with all due respect to our beloved hard sciences, they like to give us, and here in the softer sciences, the people sciences, the social sciences, they give us a hard time because we study people. And it's kind of harder, it's a little harder to prove stuff in economics than it is, say, in chemistry. And that might be true. And it kind of is what it is. But we can still use the tools available to us, especially stuff like those natural experiments, especially stuff like that historical data, to build a compendium of evidence that this thing likely causes that thing. And it is a really interesting process. So I've been a little too long-winded here. I'll cut it off here just saying research in the social sciences is really cool, but it's also very difficult to do in a meaningful and convincing way. We'll call it there. Thank you guys very much.